The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Cliffside estate, relentless drumming that usually calmed Henry's nerves. But tonight, it wasn't soothing. It sounded like a warning. Inside, the grand fireplace crackled and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the scene of domestic bliss. 6 lives were gathered in this room, their fates knotted together in a tangle that was about to pull tight and then snap. Henry stood by the ornate mantelpiece, swirling an expensive amber-colored scotch in his crystal glass. He watched his wife, Kara. 3 years they'd been married. She was absolutely radiant tonight, a vision in emerald silk. She was laughing, her head tilted back, at something John was whispering in her ear. John, Henry's younger brother, his business partner, his best friend. On the surface, it was a picture of perfection, a happy family celebrating success. But deep in Henry's gut, a cold, heavy stone had settled. He'd been ignoring the feeling for months, that quiet, insistent whisper of intuition, burying it under endless work and a desperate will to deny what he was starting to fear. To the merger. Sarah chirped, her voice bright and full of youthful excitement. She raised her champagne flute high. Sarah was John's fiancée, barely out of her 20s. With wide, trusting eyes, and so hopelessly in love, it was almost painful to watch. She clung to John's arm, as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. And to family, she added, her smile never faltering. Jeanette didn't raise her glass. The family matriarch, Henry's older sister, sat perfectly still in the large wingback chair, a silent queen surveying her court. Her eyes, sharp as flint, weren't on the celebratory group, but on the small, almost imperceptible space between Kara and John. Janet saw what the others missed, or chose to ignore. She saw the subtle, magnetic pull between their bodies. She saw the way John's hand lingered on the small of Kara, eased back just a fraction of a second too long when he guided her to a chair. It was a silent language, a secret conversation happening right in front of them all. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the room swung open with a dramatic creak, cutting through the chatter. Peter stood there, silhouetted against the dark hallway, dripping wet from the storm. He clutched a worn leather satchel to his chest, as if it held the weight of the world. Peter was the family lawyer, the keeper of all their secrets, and usually the most composed, unflappable man in any room. But tonight, his face was pale, his composure shattered. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. "Peter," Henry asked, his voice laced with concern. He set his glass down on the mantel. "You're late, and you're soaking wet." "I couldn't wait until morning, Henry," Peter said, his voice trembling just enough to be noticeable. He didn't look at Henry. His gaze slid past him and landed squarely on Kara. Kara's brilliant smile vanished as if wiped away. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a ghostly white. Her hand flew to her throat in a gesture of pure instinctual panic. "Peter, don't," she pleaded, her voice suddenly thin. "Wait. Whatever business this is, it can wait." "It can't," Peter insisted, his voice firming with resolve as he stepped fully into the room. His eyes then found Sarah, and his expression softened with a look of profound pity. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he said softly. "What is going on?" John barked, his tone aggressive. He took a step forward, instinctively positioning himself not in front of his fiancée, Sarah, but just slightly in front of Kara, a subtle, protective gesture that screamed guilt. Jeanette rose slowly from her chair, her presence commanding the room. "The accounts, Peter," she asked, her voice low and steady. "Is there a problem with the company finances?" "Not the accounts," Peter said grimly. With a sudden, violent movement, he threw the heavy satchel onto the polished mahogany coffee table. It landed with a sickening thud. The clasps burst open, and its contents spilled out across the gleaming surface. They weren't financial documents. They weren't contracts for the new merger. They were photographs. Dozens of them. Glossy, higher-resolution prints that captured moments of stolen intimacy. A sun-drenched beach house in the Maldives. A luxurious, disheveled hotel room in Paris. A quiet, candlelit corner in a small cafe right here in the city. And in every single one, John and Kara were together. They weren't smiling like family. They weren't talking like friends. They were entwined, kissing, their faces alight with a passion reserved for lovers. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so thick, so heavy, it felt like it was sucking all the air, all the life, out of the room. The crackling fire was the only sound left. Sarah stared, frozen, at the mosaic of betrayal laid out before her. Her hand, shaking violently, reached out as if in a trance and picked up a single photo. In it, John and Kara were laughing on a balcony, a famous landmark visible behind them. "John," she whispered. Her voice was a broken, fragile thing, a sound so small it barely registered as a word. You said you were in Tokyo for business?" John didn't answer. He couldn't. His face was a mask of shock and cornered fury. He wasn't looking at his heartbroken fiancée. He was looking at his brother. Henry moved with the slow, heavy exhaustion of a man whose world has just collapsed. He walked to the table, his steps deliberate and leaden. There was no shouting, no explosive rage, just a chilling, profound emptiness. He looked down at the pictures, his eyes scanning the evidence of his wife's and brother's treachery. Then he lifted his gaze to meet John's. "How long?" Henry asked. His voice was a dead thing, devoid of all emotion. "Henry, please," Kara sobbed, finally breaking. She reached for his arm, her touch recoiling as if from a hot surface. "It was a mistake. It was just... since before the wedding," Janet said. Her voice cut through Kara's pathetic excuses like a shard of ice. She walked over to the table and picked up a photo, turning it over to show the date stamped on the back. 3 years prior, suspected, she continued, her gaze burning into Kara and John. "I didn't want to believe my own eyes. I prayed I was wrong. But you two... you are so careless with your cruelty." "I love him," Kara suddenly screamed, the last shred of pretense shattering into a million pieces. The raw, ugly truth finally burst forth. She pointed a shaking finger not at Henry, her husband, but at John. "I've always loved him. But he didn't have the money, Henry. You did. You always had the money." The confession hung in the air, toxic and stinging, more damning than any photograph. The rain continued to beat against the glass, washing away the facade of a perfect family and revealing the rotten, bitter truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The knot had finally snapped, and the pieces were scattered, broken, all over the floor.